And she threatened to tear it up, destroy it, all kinds of things. And she even threatened me, so I can't read it. So all is left for me to do is ask you to join me in welcoming the Leader of the Opposition, Miss Mia, the Honorable Miss Mia Amor Mottley. Please welcome her.
Thank you very much, Paul, Betty. Let me just remind Paul that I do not threaten. I only make promises. And as a good politician, the promises that I make are ones that I keep, unlike others with whom you've had to deal with recently. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first and foremost thank the Barbados Chamber of Commerce for doing me the favor of allowing me to meet with you in a formal setting. I meet with many of you informally. I meet with many of you one-on-one. But it is good to be able to have the structure of a meeting, and it is even better to be able to do it in November, the anniversary of our nation's formation. Forgive me if I also extend a very special welcome to my colleagues, because I am very cognizant that this is not a journey that I can make on my own, but we are equally cognizant that this is not a journey that the 30 of us can make on our own either. And I have a speech, but I'll tear this speech up today, because this morning when I woke up, having written this speech, I determined, having read the speech that I delivered to you in 2010, the speech that I delivered in 2013, the speech that I delivered in 2014, the conversation that I remembered that we had in 2015, and the speech that I delivered to you last year on rebranding Barbados with the 5 platforms of immediate action that we would do differently. The new fiscal governance, the new governance and the rooting out of corruption, the making business easier in Barbados, not just for businessmen but citizens, strengthening institutions in this country that have been gutted from the law courts to the social partnership, right back through to the police force, to the immigration department, and finally dealing with a new set of productive sectors that will drive growth, because without growth, this mission means nothing. Having read those speeches again, I asked myself, what is the tolerance level of people to hear the same thing over and over and over? What is it? And where do we find ourselves now? The truth is that the answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is before us. You know it, and I know it. All of us know it. Paul may not want to say it publicly given his introduction today, because there is a Barbadian way that is so attached to fairness that the only way I can address this issue is to ask you to recall the conversation that Christiane Amanpour has had to have with the people of the world since the November election in 2016. And what is it that she said? That people get confused between being neutral and telling the truth. People get confused between being neutral and telling the truth. And that if we are to be neutral at all times, then evil will predominate, as it has done in so many war-torn areas of the world. How many times are we going to reflect on the fact that we have a government that is comfortable with Barbados being 175th out of 197 countries in the world with respect to economic growth this year, when growth is our major challenge? How many times are we going to be comfortable with a government being are satisfied with the government being comfortable with foreign reserves that didn't start to drop today or last year or even 2013. I read the 2009 budget reply that I did yesterday as well. And in that reply, we reflected on the fact that the reserves dropped 450 million between 2008 and 2009. How many times are we going to be satisfied with hearing that we have to facilitate business in this country? But yet this year, the Doing Business report comes out and Barbados drops another 15 points. How many times? How many times can we accept that a country that is known for regularity of data and its governance, punching above its weight, could now be reflected in the Global Competitiveness Survey as simply not doing what it had to do to submit the data so that we could even be considered for a ranking this year, having dropped from number 55 to number 72 in the previous year? How many times can we take this? It is like being in a bad nightmare. It is like being punch drunk. Not that I drink too much. How many times? The reality is that we are at a juncture where on the 5th of March, the Parliament will dissolve. And there are too many Bajans who are still asking the question, can we really get out of this? Can we really turn the corner? Can we really make it? Well, when I decided not to use my speech today, I came here only with 5 words in my head, as God is my witness. 5 words. We can and we shall. We can and we shall. You know, the first thing that we need to do is to understand, in recognizing that we can and we shall, that the current trajectory, the current downward spiral, the current mix of policies and mix of individuals has done nothing than to put us in a worse position year by year by year by year. And I ask you to reflect on, if you could not get the job done in 10 years, how are you going to get it done in 15? If you couldn't get the job done in 10 years, how are you going to get it done in 15? And part of the difficulty is that we have, it's a good thing, but it is a constraining factor. We are so wanting to be neutral and fair that we have allowed things to pass in this country that if we had nipped them in the bud each time, we would not be here. How does a police force, who is accountable to a governor general, become the subject of the most rabid partisan political considerations? And it's not a rumor, because it's before the law courts. How do people drive vehicles that belong to companies that are doing business with their ministries? And it is raised 3 years ago, and we turn our head and we do nothing or say nothing about it. And those vehicles are vehicles that I couldn't even buy easily where I stand now, as a BMW X5. How much does a BMW X5 cost? I don't know who are the car dealers in here. How do we say nothing when you change the law to appoint a Chief Justice? How do we say nothing when in 2013 November I came on this spot, in this room? The platform was in the middle there where the lady now is standing in orange. And I asked you to look at the Central Bank Act. and to look at the fact that the excessive printing of money, which at that time was only $370 million, not the $1.8 billion that it is now, whether the Section 48 of the Central Bank Act was not being breached because the extent of the excessive credit creation was putting our currency, our monetary stability under pressure, to be more precise, and that the government needed to come to Parliament and to speak to the country and to change the law, as is the case in Jamaica. The overdraft is governed by legislation, but the printing of money and the excess credit creation is not. There are two sections of the Central Bank Act. One that deals at Section 25 or 26 with foreign reserves, which are low, which requires the bank to write the Minister of Finance, and the other one at Sections 48, I believe it is, which requires the Minister to be written also by the Central Bank when they believe that there's excessive credit creation or that monetary stability is threatened. And 4 years ago, we discussed this in this room, only to see it mushroom from 370 million to today 1.8 billion. And I'm not talking about National Insurance Scheme holdings, because their holdings of government paper have gone from 1.4 billion to 3.9 billion in the same period of time that this government has been in office. Now I ask you these questions because if you don't understand that this trajectory with this cast of characters cannot carry us any further, then the only people we will have to blame hereinafter in 2018 is not the people who have put us here, but the people who are allowing them who put us here to remain here. So that's the first thing to being able to turn around this country. Regrettably, when we start the process, it's not going to be easy. And we know that. Because we've gone so far down into the hole that not only will we require great discipline, not only will we require the ability to think outside of the box and to do things that we've never really done before, particularly in creating the environment for growth through non-fiscal triggers, as I discussed with you at length last year, because we don't only have to tax and spend to trigger growth. How we legislate, how we facilitate, how we regulate, all of these things trigger growth. And I gave you the example and repeat it now simply of reverse mortgages. There's a level of genteel poverty that has taken root in this country, particularly among pensioners who are unable to fix a leaking roof, or steps that have tiles coming up, or banisters that need fixing. If you create the legislative framework and the regulatory framework for reverse mortgages, within no time at all, we will unlock $30–40 million in spending in this country by people who know that they have been unable to fix their houses for the last 6, 7, 8 years because they simply have been unable to afford it. And in the simple act of the passage of legislation, not the voting of money and the spending of money, in that simple act, we will unlock capital spending in the private sector in this country. Similarly, I am not worried about the things that we have to do locally because however difficult the conversation is, we can do it. What I am worried about is Irma and Maria. What I am worried about is earthquakes. Because however strong we are, we can't fight that battle. And in order for us to make sure that we defy what is coming our way, we are going to pay for a disaster in this country either before or after. The odds are not with us. Every 70 to 80 years, Barbados is challenged by a system that is completely destabilizing. Anybody who is a student of the Anglican Church will tell you what happened to St. Michael's Cathedral in the 19th century. I don't need to tell many of you what happened in Janet. In fact, part of the difficulty is as a consequence of Hurricane Janet. because we built a number of flat roofs in this country, because there was a shortage of carpenters, and I am told by those older than I am, that Barbados developed a category of worker called a storm carpenter, a man who was not particularly versed in the skill of carpentry, but who could manage to put a roof together still in spite of everything else. And what ought to have been a temporary fix has become the standard for our housing in this country. And I fear what would happen to our housing stock in Barbados. Now, why is this important? When a government can arbitrarily and wantonly concentrate on all kinds of things that create legal liabilities for all kinds of projects that have no major relevance to this country's stability, then you get worried. What are the priorities in Barbados? The ability for us to be resilient and to adapt to climate change. The ability for us to manage our water resources. The ability for us to stabilize the Scotland district that is eroding at a level and a pace that is extremely worrisome. These are the priorities that nobody else has a responsibility to do other than the state. And what we have is misguided priorities confusing themselves for the policies of a government. I say to you that if we were to start to use the other powers that a government genuinely has, and it's not rocket science. At the annual conference, I outlined the first working day of a Barbados Labour Party Parliament with the order paper. I can do it because I know what it is to have been in government for over and public life for 28 years. I know how the system works. I know that once a bill is drafted and it is signed off by the Attorney General as fit for submission to Cabinet, that it comes to Cabinet for Cabinet to determine. And once Cabinet accepts, amends, or otherwise deals with it, it is then sent to Parliament. And the Attorney General once again has to submit that it is fit for certification. It is certified as being fit for submission to Parliament. We didn't wait and have not waited until an election process is over to tell you how serious we are about rooting out corruption when I spoke to you last year. We've produced an Integrity Commission bill, and I want to thank the persons who helped us in this effort: Mr. David Simmons, Mr. Leslie Haynes, Mr. Stuart Motley, Gregory Nichols. But in particular, I also want to thank the lawyers of the Barbados Labour Party, led by Dale Marshall and Wilfred Abrams and Eddie Hinkson, Kerry Simmons, Ralph Thorne, who did what most people don't normally do: roll up their sleeves. Don't wait for a consultant, and let's get this thing right. And let's make sure that that which we have drafted matches the policy framework that we need. We wouldn't be joking. We're not. And I thank Wilfred for explaining it on the call-in program on Monday, and Dale for explaining it to the country on Saturday. Because in that bill, if you go through it, and I've written the social partners, and therefore a copy should come to your organization shortly with asking you to comment on it, it goes right down to the receipt of gifts. It goes to the issue of whistleblowers, which is a critical issue in a small society, and how you protect those who know that something fundamentally wrong is going on, but who do not know how to be able to stop it because there is no protection for them. Similarly, we've committed on that first day to the repealing of the National Social Responsibility Levy. And there are those who get worried. Well, the reality is that Barbados has to restructure its tax system. But separate from that, a tax that no three people in this room can interpret properly for me how it is to be applied cannot be a good tax. Find me three people in this room now who can say the same thing. Taxation must be certain, it must be transparent, and it must be fair. And the problem is that this government, in its failure to confront the realities of our circumstances, have literally pulled for anything that can give them cover. In the same way that all of them want to run to St. John for high ground now for cover, they wanted cover in relation to how they treat the economic policy in Barbados. And I say to you that it is time the people and the businesses of Barbados stop being the guinea pigs for people who have literally failed in every single respect. I challenge you to write down every single tax initiative announced by this government since 2008. You remember there was to be a cell phone tax in 2008? You remember that? Do you remember that there was to be a tax on gaming machines that is still not being paid in this country? Do you remember that there was to be a levy that was attached to the environment in relation to being able to pay for garbage on the NIS? I can go on and on and on. But what is the problem is that in the same way that they come up with these plans, there's no consultation. There's not even a listening to the public servants. And what has happened is that we have become the guinea pigs for the people who are trying to play catch up and to play a form of economic cosmetics and political cosmetics, because it doesn't matter what the substance is. It is only important how it going to look, how it going to sound. We have come equally to recognize that there are powers not just of legislation that can trigger growth in this country. And we said then that policy also triggers growth. An economy grows when businesses expand or new businesses are created. An economy grows when new people are added to the labor force. And we can determine whether we're going to add those people into the labor force at $1,200 a month, doing menial tasks, at $2,500 a month, at $5,000 a month, at $8,000 or $10,000 a month. And the reason why I'm asking you to focus on this is because education for us is much more than just a means of social empowerment and social mobility. The level of education that we give our people will determine the quality of the workforce and hence the quality of production that we can have in this country. But we seem to have gotten mixed up. And all of a sudden, a government that does not know how to get from Bridgetown to Oistins wants to tell you they can't afford to pay for education, and everybody suddenly believes them. Government is about choices. And what are the two things for which we are most competitive in the world, irrespective of the fact that there's no rating this year? Go back and look at it. We are most competitive in education, and we are most competitive in healthcare, the provision of healthcare. And in those two instances, they're not just social sectors, but they are investments. They're investments with respect to medical tourism. They're investments with respect to senior citizens' villages. They're investments with respect to the provision of nursing care. They're investments with respect to the provision of training if we get to establish our International College of Nursing. And nursing is not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence and a robot, because the very nature of nursing requires human empathy and human care. We have to start making serious decisions about whether what we are teaching at the Polytechnic will be superfluous because technology is going to make those tasks irrelevant. When I became Minister of Education, most cars in Barbados did not have computers in them. When I approached the private sector and asked them to help us build out the Autotronics lab in 1997, the private sector regrettably said no. Can you find a car in this country now that doesn't have computers in it? What are the new industries that we're going to force research and development? I had the good fortune of touring with some of my members a biotechnology facility in this country, driven by young Barbadians, doing serious research and development, risking their own money to do it. and coming up with solutions that are not only suitable for this country, but combined with industrial designs suitable for the global community. How many of us realize that the advent of technology is going to make a lot of the things for which we are comfortable irrelevant? When 2 years ago I said that we want to set ourselves a target that Barbados must be a fossil fuel-free society by 2030, I was not aware then of the quickening pace of self-driving cars or the quickening reduction of costs in batteries. I say all of this to make one simple point. What you need is a government that is fit for purpose in this country. There is nothing so wrong with Barbados that cannot be fixed by a strong dose of leadership. And there's a cloud over this country that causes me sometimes to get worried, because I begin to believe that the biggest crime of the Democratic Labour Party government is robbing the spirit and the belief in oneself of the people in this country. This is a country that has produced some extraordinary people. And I'm not talking only about the scientists and those who would have been at the head of their time in cane breeding in the 19th century. I'm talking about ordinary Bajans. I use a metaphor of a lady who was born on the 1st of May 1923. And forgive me, she was a strong member of the Barbados Labour Party. She was born on May Day. She was Labour by birth and Labour by choice. Her name was Eldine Boyce. Some in this room may know her. She was an extraordinary woman who had to face all of the odds coming up in the 1930s and 40s, of all the tribulations that so many of our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles had to face. But you know what? They did it. And they exhibited a resilience and went through a world war and went through riots. For them, a free education or access to health care or social security would never go out of style, because they knew what it was not to have it. And they knew the difference that it made to the quality of life and the stability that we take for granted on 166 square miles. Barbados has one asset, and it's called stability. And the day that we lose it, you can kiss everything goodbye. And that's what makes this government criminal in its conduct. Because if you get public health wrong, you're in trouble. And if you get crime and security wrong, you're in trouble. I'm not worried about bringing back this economy. It's going to be difficult, but we can and we shall. And we've given you so many different ideas in the last few years. We can print them again for you, and a manifesto will come. But above all else, what we have given you is the covenant of hope. Now, why is that important? Because you must know and be able to place a reasonable bet as to how your government will act in any given situation. You must not be shocked as to how we will treat to the issue of renewable energy. You must not wonder, how does a government with any sense go and sign $4.7 billion in commitments for a power purchase agreement over 30 years? Where you going to get that money from? But if you understand the principles outlined in the covenant of hope and the values that it underpins, then you will understand, well, this is a government that is likely to look for forms of investment that make sense, that will have the capacity to utilize Barbadian creativity and ingenuity, that has minimal drain on foreign exchange, hence photovoltaics or biotechnology, and that will not be repatriating dividends to people when we have surplus liquidity in the system, that if you have the appropriate financial instruments, people can have access to finance in this country without having to go begging and then to repatriate dividends overseas for raw materials that are totally Barbadian and not imported. I ask you to reflect on these matters, because when you ask me how can we get out of it, the first thing we do, and I've committed already, that the Barbados Labour Party government will bring to you within 6 weeks the basic framework for economic stabilization and growth. We have been working for more than 15 months now in a serious way. We've had a number of sectoral consultations in the last 2 months and are continuing. We've met with people from the healthcare sector, from the education, international business, tourism, small business. We have still to do a few more. But how we start is how we will finish. And I say that to let you know that it is not only important what we do, but how we do it. This government has produced a number of plans. The last one, perhaps, is the most involvement that you all have had any involvement in or participation in. And even then, God knows how much that truly has been, because it has been done at the level of public servants without the involvement of the policy directorate in it. If we are serious about turning this country around, the first thing that is required, as I said to you last year, is a commitment to have serious engagement of the social partnership on an ongoing and regular basis. Because there has been a destruction of trust in this country, it means that we're going to have to agree to rebuild trust. And how do we rebuild trust? I believe that a restructured social partnership that allows us to be able to have some level of shared governance and oversight over some key indices, such that if we say we are going to do X, there is evidence of us doing X, and that there is that communication not just from the government of the country, but the social partnership, reflecting that there is authenticity and truth in what we are saying that we are doing, rather than the kind of charades that have paraded itself for reports in this country. We also believe that the social partnership should have a dedicated wing that treats to social justice, because there can be no ability to get through the next few years without ensuring that we take care of those who are most vulnerable, and to ensure that at all stages in this country that there is fairness and social justice obtaining in everything that we do. That is the difference between the private sphere and the public sphere. In the private sphere, it is desirable. In the public sphere, it is obligatory. Fairness and transparency and accountability. And I ask you, therefore, to reflect on these things, because we all know the policies that can be put in place. We've discussed them over and over and over. We've said to you that the burden of adjustment must be fair and shared. We've said to you that we can no longer use our national insurance fund like a piggy bank for a profligate and reckless government. We've said to you that we have to stop printing money. We've said to you that we need to grow the sectors and to bring about a level of investment, but that we need to do so in a way that does not make Barbadians tenants in their own country, but masters of their own fate. And if we were to do all of this just to make us tenants, then count me out. Find somebody else. But if we're going to do all of this to allow each and every one of you who call this country home to be able to share not just in the burden of adjustment, but in the bounty that follows from prosperity and growth, then count us in. And if you can do it with us, and you can walk that road with us, and if you can believe that we can and we shall in the way that I stand fervently before you today to give you that commitment, then I say to you that this moment in time will cause me to reflect on Charles Dickens's novel, and forgive me for adaptation, that we stand on the cusp of what is not a tale of two cities, but a tale of 2 decades. That it was the worst of times, and that it was the best of times. The last decade of our life has left us with an economy smaller than the one that we started the decade with. The last decade of our country's history has left each and every Barbadian, according to Rand's research, $20,000 poorer than they were at the beginning of the decade. The last decade of our life has seen us end up with crime at higher levels, with social implosion, and with all of the indices going in the wrong way. I believe that next Thursday, which is the 30th of November, and which represents the first day of this nation's next 50 years, can become to be remembered as the start of a decade that will secure the next 50. For if we secure the next 50, then in cricketing terms, we shall reach a century not out. But if we get the next decade wrong, and if we perpetuate it being the worst of times, then I fear for our nation. I believe it can be the best of times. And we can, and we shall make it so. Not because the Labour Party has 30 of the brightest people in the country. We don't. Not because we have the only people that care. We don't. But because the combination of caring and commitment and capacity finds itself in these 30 only to be a representative sample of those thousands who care in this country, and those thousands who are committed, and those thousands who are capable but who have not been asked to do anything. I believe that the combination of the two shall make the difference, such that on this moment we can reflect and say it truly was the worst of times and the best of times. We can and we shall. The only question for you is, will you, can you, and must you? As always, it is about choices, and the choice is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Opposition Leader Ms. Mia Mottley. We can and we shall. A couple of comments from the Opposition Leader. Economic growth, foreign reserves falling, facilitating business, law and order, resilience and preparation for climate change, management of water resources, management of the Scotland District, Day one activities. So what do we want to see on day one? What will we see on day one? Corruption and legislation reform, repeal of the NSRL, taxation reform, education. I got particularly interested in healthcare, nurses college, biotechnology, renewable energy, social partnership. And then some big headlines: leadership, self-belief, and stability of the nation. So we have a lot to discuss and chew on, and I invite you now to bring your questions. What we will want is for you to identify your name, and I would implore you, so that we can get through as many questions as possible, to reduce your statements to questions as opposed to comments, because we don't want to have another feature address. So I'm going to be very, very strong on this particular feature so we can have as many questions. I will take the first question as you warm up. Where are the microphones? Right, so Carlos has a microphone over there. So you can indicate by showing your hands, and we'll come quickly over to you. I have a number of questions. I'm not going to ask all of mine for sure. And I'll start with a nice, easy one. Crime and security is a great challenge, and I think we're seeing so much of it now. It feels like there's a significant breakdown. What are your views on that, and how could we sort of restore our communities to some serious law and order?
First thing is that people have to be able to work and to eat and to see the way forward. Between 1991 and 1994, George and others would tell you that we went through, in fact, it is still the highest spate of crime in terms of burglaries and robberies. We were able to bring those burglaries and robberies by the end of 2007, Dale, I think robberies were at 1/3 of what they were in the early 1990s, and burglaries were at 1/4 of what they were in the early 1990s. What bothers me is not the ability generally to deal with crime in this country, because once we can, one, be our brother's keeper until economic growth comes back, and two, spur economic growth so that people are working and saving and earning in this country, things will change. But what bothers me is that while we get there, the spectacle of automatic weapons in the hands of people between the ages of 15 and 20 is a serious concern, because there can be no reasoning with a young boy who is more concerned with testosterone than with any form of any other activity. And even the older people in the communities recognize this. So everything has to be done to stem the spread of automatic guns in this country. We have some problems regionally. Part of the difficulty is that a lot of what is mission critical in Barbados from day one does not necessarily bear transparent conversation without compromising the country's national security interests or national interests. And I'm not only talking about crime, I'm talking about in the economy and a number of other areas. But forgive me for saying this. Most governments come to office with one mission critical or two mission critical areas. We are going to come to office, should it be the will of the people, with about 7 or 8 areas that are mission critical from day one, and that cannot continue to wait. We cannot continue to wait any further for a resolution. The tragedy of what we're going through now is that we are holding on for a constitutional date that everybody knows that nothing is going to be done until after elections. And in the meantime, the rate of deterioration continues apace. It is like watching a cricket team batting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The score is such that they're going to lose by an innings and 200 runs. And I don't mean the electoral defeat of the Democratic Labour Party. I mean the country. And you continue to insist that you bat till 5:30 because you want to play shots and get runs on the scoreboard. So you want to pass a road traffic act that has not been the subject of consultation and that may well be passed unconstitutionally just because you want to score a run on the board. But who suffers? The country. And if we have, regrettably, a spate of crime at the wrong time under circumstances that we can't control, doesn't matter what you or I do, it's going to take a long, long, long time to correct the consequences of it. And I therefore go to sleep every night praying that nothing so happens, because that is one like Irma and Maria that we can't withstand easily.
Thank you very much. Recognize Mr. Armstrong. Andy.
Andy Armstrong. Today I'm wearing the hat of the Integrity Group of Barbados, which, let me just stress, is not a political party. We're just a group of concerned citizens. And I hope you believe that, Ms. Mottley. We are not looking to be political at all.
I believe you, Andy.
Thank you. Just two comments I couldn't resist. The fossil-free society by 2030. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really would be very excited if that could happen, and I would be fully behind you. And secondly, I loved your quote, and I hope I got it right. Fairness, transparency, and accountability are desirable in the private sector, but obligatory in the public sector. And I think we should all believe that. Now, the Public Accounts Committee. Every year the Auditor General comes out and issues a number of concerns. And I think as general citizens we're very, very concerned by what comes out in there. Now, to be fair to you, you did try to get the Public Accounts Committee working, and you even summoned some ministers to appear. They refused to appear. And then from the outside it looks like the current government actually has a threat to repeal the Public Accounts Committee. So if you take office who is going to hold ministers and senior civil servants accountable, and how can we ensure that that will be done?
Thank you very much, Andy. First of all, let me say to you that the Public Accounts Committee has been working. There have been over 40-something meetings that we've had. In 48 meetings, Kerry is signaling to me. But in addition to that, we have evidence that is about 4 foot high on the National Housing Corporation, and a report will come out at some point, very shortly. We're going through the evidence now. The structure of the PAC requires far more support than it currently has. And it's the structure of Parliament as well. Because you can't do these things on a part-time, voluntary basis and expect to make progress. And that's part of the difficulty. As it relates to who will hold us accountable, legislation is there now, Andy. We passed legislation last time we were in government that would hold ministers accountable for decisions that they insisted had to be put in place if the permanent secretary against the wishes of the public servants. That minister can be held liable now. There are crimes of malfeasance that are known to the common law that can be applicable even in the absence of wanting to use the 1929 Prevention of Corruption Act, or of course the new bill that the government passed had the Governor General assent but will not proclaim. There are things that can be done. Our Integrity Commission bill that we are passing, hopefully with the will of the public, places specific obligations on the Commission to take action in certain circumstances. And in respect to the Auditor General, when I spoke to you all here last year, you might recall that we committed to making the Auditor General further his department independent and providing the constitutional protection that is necessary. One of the problems that the Auditor General has now is that he is short by about 25 auditors, Kerry, Wilfred, 25 auditors, and this has been chronic. I have written the Ministry of Finance on his behalf 2 or 3 times, because as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, I chair the estimates process for the Auditor General. But if you can't get the responsibility to appoint the people, then the posts remain vacant. So you ask, in whose interest is it for the posts to remain vacant? I don't know. But I know this, that under Barbados Labour Party government, there are a number of things that have to become independent. The Central Bank is one, the Auditor General's Department is one, and the Barbados Statistical Service needs to become a National Statistics Institute that is going to be untainted by any kind of executive interference with respect to the production of independent data. So I hope that you would appreciate that the provisioning of these entities with the appropriate constitutional protection, as well as devolving the decision-making for their staffing from the executive and for their vote straight to Parliament without having to come through the executive, in my view, is the best way to protect their independence. Right now you have to go through the Ministry of Finance, but if the Auditor General could come straight to Parliament for his vote, then it would not in any way involve the tainting of the Ministry of Finance. You're welcome.
Thank you for that question, Andy. I see Lalo. I recognize you, Lalo Vaswani.
Honorable Mia Mottley, in your remarks, you referred to a vision, inspiring a vision, collective vision for the next 50 years. Mm-hmm. What is your view on the importance of integrating values in education that will result in character being the end of education, whereby we don't only focus on academic heroes, but also community heroes and not community zeros? Mm-hmm. And I just, my comment, you might recall when you were Attorney General, Chairman of Erdiston Teachers College invited Dr. Anu from Zambia, who was proficient in that particular area of education. They came to Barbados and provided the intellectual rights to a program, and with your involvement, you insisted that Curriculum 2000 be represented and given to Earthston. So what is your view of the importance, otherwise, of integrating values in education in order to produce the character within our population that will take us to the next, you say 50, I say 500 years?
There's no doubt, Lalu, that values are important. That's why values are the bedrock of our covenant of hope. And in the same way that we believe values to drive the principles from which policies and programs will come, we believe that values must drive the character of each and every Barbadian. So, without a doubt. The conversation has to be, though, nationally on what values we want, and that conversation will take place because, as I said, no 20 or 30 or 40 people will ever foist on this country things that are outside of the ambit of government and relate to governance and society. So we will have that conversation nationally.
If I might just add, would it be one of your mission specific items?
Well, I've said already that no policy or program is going to be implemented without values. So therefore, the person who is the Minister of Education and the persons who are other ministers dealing with non-formal education and community development must know that it matters, loyalty matters, that hard work matters, that family and community matter, that there are certain things that we believe have to be underscored. And I think when you see our manifesto, you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Recognize Anthony Shaw.
Thank you. Smartly. I also am a member of the Integrity Group for Barbados, and we recently looked at your integrity legislation, and as you know, I wear the hat of the press nowadays. And you know, when you're viewing things in integrity, it would be very helpful if we had a Freedom of Information Act, so you can actually dig into things and churn things out. That's the first question.
I thought the nation would have had a front page editorial on that every year on the anniversary of this government's election, because that was one of the first things that the government promised, and having not delivered it, I would have thought that the press would have been at the front line of demanding it on an annual basis. I can assure you that you will not need to have a front page editorial for a BLP government on a Freedom of Information Act.
I'm happy to hear that.
Because you will get it early.
That's very good. The second question was on general independence. You mentioned about the governor of the central bank. And I also have here written down the DPP. Now we have a situation where the DPP office is vacant, and we have an outgoing, well, we have a, I shouldn't say outgoing, but we have elections around the corner. So there's a possibility that DPP office could be filled. Anyhow, moving on.
I don't know why you would want to move on. I thought you wanted me to speak. And I thought you wanted me to say, as the chairman of my party and I discussed on Sunday, that there are a number of positions in this country that are vacant now, that this country needs to demand cannot be filled in the dying days of an administration. If this government becomes the government of the country again, there's no problem. Appoint who you want. If somebody else becomes the government of the country, then they will have that right. But you have from a governor general, you have a governor of the central bank, you have a director of public prosecutions. These are all posts that are either in the Constitution or serious posts that will affect the quality of life and the quality of decision making in Barbados. Now, if people only allow the opposition to be the only voice on these matters, then the government will fill them with impunity. And you will be stuck with whomsoever they choose. And the consequences of that are not going to be easy, because they will affect the condition of life and the options of an incoming government in a serious way. And I refer also not just to those, let's also talk about these service commissions for whom the appointments there are constitutionally driven, and all of whose appointments come up shortly. And remember, if they then reappoint with impunity in the dying days of a government, we are then stuck as a country with the consequences thereto. And if we are not, there's a price that will be paid. I can only say to you that, having discussed it with my colleagues and the chairman as recent as Sunday, we cannot seriously consider ourselves bound by any inopportune or improper decision made in the dying days of this administration that will extend its protection to people who ought not to be protected. I say no more.
One final
I'm
question.
very happy to hear that, but let me finish the question. So I'm happy to hear that. But what's more important is a structure to prohibit this from happening. So you have mentioned you don't want this to happen, but how can you change a structure that exists now so it doesn't recur?
Anthony, Barbados needs constitutional reform. We need constitutional reform. And there's a draft constitution that's been left in the Attorney General's office now for over a decade. It will no longer be applicable today because things have also changed there as well. But it is far more appropriate than the one that we have now, because it speaks to the role of governance and not just the role of government. And a new constitution of Barbados has to speak to the role of governance. We cannot educate our people and expect them to behave like if they're not educated, not giving them access to information, doing things that you think that they will just ignore. How we treat to one another in this country has to change. And if you ask me, what is going to be the biggest legacy apart from fixing the economy of a Barbados Labour Party government, should it be the will of the people, it is going to be to provide you with open, transparent government and greater citizen engagement and democracy. That is the role. Barbadians must be empowered and enfranchised. And that's what I mean every time when I say I am not interested in Bajans being tenants, but in Bajans being owners and participants of this country. I am a child of independence, born 1 year before independence. And it cannot be that those things which obtained in the 1960s, from the planning legislation to the zoning of water, continues along with the Constitution to govern a Barbados that starts its 51st year next Thursday.
I recognize the gentleman at the back.
Michael Berry.
Okay.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Miss Mottley. Hello. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I have a question really in sort of 3 parts. Maybe it's the hard-edge question. Would a government led by you be prepared to go to a multinational lending agency and get a really big loan sufficient to sink all the foreign exchange liabilities of the country and provide working capital for a 5-year recovery program? And 2, would a government led by you be willing to change the investment, or what is effectively the investment mandate of the National Insurance Scheme so that it can start to invest properly as a pension plan? And thirdly, would a government by you be willing to reform the central bank and look at repealing the Exchange Control Act, which I believe is a detriment to this country? It's a piece of legislation that came in shortly after independence and before, in fact, the country had the Barbados dollar. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. You have a long run-up, so I'm going to equally recognize that you want to play with pace, but I'm going to battle. 1, in relation to the National Insurance Fund and its investment guidelines, those have to change. They have to change in terms of the ratio. There's too much concentration in respect of government instruments. There's too much concentration domestically. All of our eggs, regrettably, are in one basket, and we need to have a diversified investment portfolio that I am prepared to be advised upon as head of a future government. 2, in relation, and I say so against the background that this government has prohibited the National Insurance Scheme from doing any types of investments outside of Barbados, I believe, for the last 8 years or so. 2, in relation to the first point, we will do whatever it takes that is legal and moral to fix this country. We're beating around the bush, but in a very real sense, you're asking me to specifically say whether it will be a multinational corporation to absorb all of our foreign debt in one place. I don't think that's how it's going to work. But there will be engagements at an international level because Barbados cannot get out of the hole on its own. Secondly, there will have to be some kind of consideration as to whether we pursue a debt exchange program, and those conversations will take place. But one of the invidious things, and I say so with all honesty, we have been reduced by waiting with problems enduring so long. The house is on fire. Half the house is on fire. Nobody has called for a fireman. But we have these conversations on the outside of the house on fire without realizing that the conversations themselves can cause more fire to move at a quicker pace. And I ask us to recognize that part of the difficulty is that we're going to have communication and consultation at the level of sectors and people in the country, but recognize that what we say publicly in a world with the internet and technology may make us more vulnerable to actions that will make it more difficult for Barbados to recover from this position. So I say that generally, but we will be prepared to do that which is necessary and legal and moral to get Barbados out of this, because Barbados at all costs must be brought back from the brink. And that's why I spoke today in terms of we can and we shall, because we have a plan that at the right time will be released. Now is not the right time for the reasons that I just said. That we believe that within the first few months we know exactly every step that we need to take. But equally, we have to understand the depth of the problem, and that can only be done once you get in there, because this government is not prepared to share the facts of our reality with anybody. On the last point, which was, what was it again?
Exchange control.
Exchange control. That's a conversation that we need to have. Look, before we left government, the Barbados Labour Party government liberalized a lot of exchange control requirements, as you know. Because this government has had a reserve problem starting from as far back as 2009, they have in fact reintroduced so many things that have had, in my view, the opposite effect of creating confidence. It has literally eroded confidence down to all of the things that they've put in place for lawyers and people buying property, etc. It is a disaster. And if you want people to panic, put restrictions in place for people to panic. I say no more at this stage, but it is a conversation that we will have, because we recognize equally that because stability is our greatest asset, we will do that which is necessary, legal and moral to save the Barbados dollar at all costs, because that is what preserves stability. When I first went to Jamaica in 1989, the Jamaica dollar was 6-1. When I went to Jamaica 2 months ago, it was 130-1. But Jamaicans can feed themselves, and Jamaicans can do a lot of things out there with that land scale, land size that we can't do here. So we need to dig down, dig deep, make the sacrifices that are necessary, save our dollar, get back investment grade, and get this country working again as we know it can. The only thing stopping it is people who don't want to make decisions, people who don't want to pass legislation, people who use delay as the engine of corruption. That's the reality of Barbados in 2017, regrettably. And then a population that turns the other face because we don't want to be accused of being political.
Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Mottley. Thank you very much this afternoon for your remarks. They're quite insightful. You mentioned a number of ills plaguing the country at this time, with which I believe everyone in this room is, we're all familiar. But one that I think which would be of deep concern to members in the business community would be the issue of business facilitation or lack thereof. I wonder whether and to what extent you see the civil service as playing a role in that context, and if so, how would a government led by you address that particular issue?
Thank you. Forgive me for not repeating it this year again, because I think every year I've addressed this one topic, and that is that Barbados' government needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed. Barbados and India suffer from the same debilitations, that we were both the benefit of early institutional development. Now, the only way we can do that appropriately is by bringing all of the players to the table, understanding why we do what we are doing, what is the public interest we want to protect, what is the public mischief we need to avert, and does technology allow us a more effective and efficient way of doing so, and are there social justice issues that need to be taken into account. I didn't say this to you publicly. I spoke only on the first order paper. But the others within the party know that within the first few weeks of a cabinet being installed, that there are some key issues that on a Monday we have to deal with capital projects, Monday afternoon, all major capital projects, public sector and private sector, because unless we can fuel growth in this country again, we're not in anything. So that's the first thing. But while we do that, we have to fix the real problem. And the real problem on a Wednesday is going to be making Barbados work again, as I said in the last budget reply, where we, for example, start off with planning. Our planning legislation is 1966. Barbados cannot move forward into the next decade of the 21st century with planning legislation that is 51 years old. And therefore, within the first few weeks of government, 2-3 times a week until we get the drafting instructions right, we will bring the private planners, the public planners, the construction people, the social partnership, and the civil society in a room such as this, and we go through the legislation that exists now part by part by part by part until we get the new drafting instructions right. That can't take more than 3-4 weeks. And then the drafters go off and come back to us with a new bill within the first 2 months thereafter. So that within 3-4 months, we should be in a position to have new planning legislation in this country that appropriately deals with responsibilities and timelines, rather than this nonsense of people having to wait a year, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in order to get decisions in relation to planning. And I don't blame the existing planners, but I say this: we are lawmakers. And if the system is not working right, then you reflect the changes that you want to in new legislation. And we seem to have a government that believes that they are disconnected from the process of lawmaking and policy making. Now, I use planning, but I could do the same thing with liquor licenses. I can have the same discussion with corporate affairs. I can have the same discussion with driver's licenses. We are going to allow Barbadians, because that is another area that will boost economic growth by at least 2% of GDP, we reckon. We're going to allow Barbadians to be able to have a digital government. We cannot have an analog government in the 21st century. Can't.
Absolutely correct.
It also means that we're going to have to also look at the issue of digital currency. Now, I've deliberately stayed away from all of these solutions today because we have Tanta solutions. That's not the issue. The issue is, how do we protect what we have before the time comes to execute the solutions? And that's why I gave the kind of speech that I gave today, because too many people are beginning to doubt that we can turn the corner as a country. We can, and the solutions are there. Thank you.
I see a question at the back. Recognize Tony Olton.
Tony Olton, leadership consultant and coach. Once again, you've shared your vision, your thinking. But in the context of leadership, my question is, help us to understand what is at your core. What is it that drives your thinking? What is it your heart? What is it that really, deep down inside, drives you and makes you the person that you are, and more than anything else, at your core, informs your decision making?
I thought I did too much of that already, Tony.
In summary, can we hear that in summary?
Fairness. I believe in being fair. And that's the essence of who we are as Bajans. And I said it just now. In the private sphere, you have the luxury of going how you want to go, but hopefully your Christian values and your other values if they're not Christian, will cause you to understand that you need to be fair. But in the public sphere, we don't have a choice. That's why we are where we are, because the only way people can live together in a small space is if we create an atmosphere of fairness. Now, at the same time, we need to push, and I believe in winning and excelling. So if I go to work 22 hours a day to get a job done, I'm going to work it. When we had Cricket World Cup, we had to introduce the Joint Regional Communications Center and the Advanced Passenger Information System for 10 countries in the region. We had deadlines down our throat. I'm sorry, I don't know if Jeffrey Bostick is here today. Jeffrey worked with me at that time on that project. And Jeffrey will tell you that for 6 days we did not sleep, literally, because we had a deadline to be able to bring 10 immigration authorities, 10 airports, all on stream to create a single domestic space. Same thing when the prison burnt down. So what drives me? The ability to see a task completed. What frustrates me? A government that has taken for granted that this country has been good to it and to all of us, and that it should be the first generation of independent Barbadians, independence generation of Barbadians, that has caused the greatest damage and greatest destruction, must be something that caused Grantley Adams, Errol Bard, Tom Adams, and all of the rest of them in the graves to be rolling and crying. It is a travesty, it is a tragedy, and we need to do better for our children.
Ms. Mottley, before we take the next question, Ms. Mottley, you talked about self-belief, like there's a lack of self-belief in our communities. How are you going to address this particular matter?
The Covenant of Hope says that the first platform that we need to drive at is national consciousness, a new national consciousness and a belief in self. I believe that productivity in Barbados is not driven by quantitative problems. It's driven essentially by qualitative and cultural issues. There are too many of our people still in a room that if somebody walks in and doesn't speak to them straight off, say, he don't like me, or he cutting the eye at me, and immediately that determines their output. We have to look into the mirror, as Mr. Barr said, and love who we see. And we have to recognize that we can disagree in a small society without being disagreeable. And we have to recognize that who we are is great and glorious and matters. There are too many people who are still driven by all kinds of prejudices that make no sense. When you go into a bank, it should not matter who you know. It should matter whether what you are asking the bank to borrow the money for is good enough for you to be given a chance in this country. And I feel strongly that if we can reach the day when we can open the windows to this nation, as I say all the time, I hear the nation, so that a boy in Belle Plaine with an idea that is brilliant can have as much success as the son of an industrialist in this country getting access to money, then I know we would have arrived. We have to create that environment of fairness. That is what has made us who we are in the past, and it is what will keep us great and keep us punching above our weight.
Thank you. Question at the back.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Clark. I have a question to do with national wellness. What would be your commitment, your government's commitment to be successful to the promotion of national wellness for everybody? Healthcare, green spaces, exercise, medical tourism, sustainable agriculture, affordable, high-quality food, and this type of thing. You know, we can talk about business, and it is obviously very important, but some of the statistics we've seen on Barbados and the population and the quality of the health of the general population are not great. And I've seen other countries have been able to promote these programs quite successfully and made quite a big difference to the well-being in general of everyone.
Huge, Jimmy. The truth is, the last time I spoke at the annual conference, I made these points very clear because right now it makes sense. We have a national crisis in our country with chronic non-communicable diseases, heart attacks, diabetes, strokes. It's out of control. And right now, it is costing us more to treat people than if we decided to incentivize people to eat properly and exercise properly and take responsibility for their own health and wellness. So we are going to be very strong. Last year, once again, I announced that we would have a Ministry of Health and Wellness as opposed, and that's why I didn't repeat it again this year in here. But that is absolutely critical because we continue to see expanding budgetary resources for declining national wellness. Cannot work. Similarly, we do not believe that we need to recreate everything from scratch. Barbados is blessed with having a large number of entrepreneurs in the medical services sector. We may need to have more medical tourism to be able to expand the volume of business such that the services and the costs become more affordable to Barbadians as we manage it going forward. In respect to green spaces, the National Botanical Gardens is in my constituency. It was acquired in 2006. Other than to put up a green gate marked National Botanical Gardens and for the Cabinet to recommit to it in 2009, the only thing this government has done other than that is Dennis Lowe planting 2 trees, but then presiding over sargassum weed being dumped on the National Botanical Garden site, which is, by the way, a Zone 1 Codrington water well site, and 2, having Deltro proposing to go and put a photovoltaic farm on what is the last remaining green space for ordinary Bajans to have in St. Michael. It is a travesty. I have said I will fight it because we too have people. Queen's Park is not Central Park or Hyde Park. Bajans deserve to have an area that is a green space that they can carry the children, they can run boat, they can have parties, they can jog, they can ride, they can hold concerts. We need 200 acres too. There are over 100,000 people living in St. Michael. But we have this site acquired since 2007, sitting down idle because Dennis Lowe is more interested in Cahill and Deltro than in making sure that the sign that the NCC put up at the front of the park is a real opportunity for Bajans to go and walk boat in there.
So we're
committed.
I'm sorry, 2:15. I'll take one final question, and I see that Mr. White has the microphone.
Because I read, it means I've been here. Honorable Mayor, very good presentation as always. I must start with Clark because I put a plug in first at the Barbados Diabetes Foundation. I have all the business community here, so just look out for calls from Cali Boyer. We are really looking to make a big difference with the change with the communicable diseases and the rate at which you see obesity is taking over the country. So that is, I want to just put that plug in, so thank you.
Ricky, before you start, may I use the opportunity of thanking you for allowing us, when the government restored the 10% salaries to themselves in the absence of a public service pay cut, the Barbados Labour Party parliamentarians took a decision that the back pay that would come to us would go to 2 charities. One was, I think, the Barbados Diabetes Foundation, where we sent $27,000, and one was the Salvation Army.
Correct.
And the monthly amount goes to a different charity in this country because we will not accept a cent of that money so long as public servants in Barbados are not receiving either a cost of living increase or a salary increase.
Very much. Now, the 2 things for me. One is on the, most people in here would know that I found myself in a very difficult situation. I haven't written the company 3 times separately to get to this stage. But my real concern is that we went from a stage where you mentioned enfranchisement and the ability of Barbadians to basically invest in this country. And with interest rates at virtually 0.5, or you can tell me what they are at, and little opportunities for growth industries, we have a major matter before us. And we just lodged, Dr. Skate is here, we just lodged the papers in court today, and it should never have had to come to this stage. We cannot have a stage where Barbadian minority shareholders could just be brushed aside. We won't ever want to see it again, and that legislation has to be looked at. We don't want to debate the case in here, but it's fundamental. I was in London at the time. I tried to reach out to several people, but I came home and I wrote 3 different places. I wrote to local to the company, I wrote to regional, and I wrote to group. And I did not want to have to get to a stage where we had to go to law, but we cannot have a stage that Barbados built a company for over 100 years, and then you can go and form on a paper company, and then that was it. Some of you here know our shareholders, but we just cannot have that. So we're going to fight that very strong. What I want to know is that the legislation has got whatever changes necessary. I want to hear what kind of changes that are going to be able to make it that the normal Barbadians could be able to get involved in the investment in the country. That's the first question.
Ricky, begin with, you have me at a disadvantage because I don't know all of the facts. And however much I like to sound good, unlike this government, I'm not going to speak in a vacuum without being briefed. So I am prepared to look at what the facts are and reflect and give decisions, but I'm not going to answer a question without having the facts.
Okay. The second one is, the final one is that we've got a number of people who, in terms of small, medium-sized businesses, and so many of those businesses are looking for the opportunity to invest, as you point out, the guy in St. Andrew and so on. And there are a lot of initiatives that I know have been put into place or started. But I'm not finding that the percentage of people who are getting access is high enough for any of us in this room to be satisfied. What is that your government will be doing to make sure that those persons who are small and medium-sized businesses get access to financing that, would be able to sort of realize the dreams that they have in mind?
We recognize that this government came to office with the promise of 40% procurement to small businesses. And far from 40% procurement to small businesses obtaining, we have seen the greatest consolidation of wealth in this country since independence. One man cannot get a $24 million contract at Valerie, a $28 million housing contract at Grotto, a $42 million molasses storage tank, 20-year contract in the Barbados Bridgetown Harbor, in the port berth 5, which is $70 million, which was an overrun of $15 million. Equipment commissioned on the Grand Crane and other equipment bought in the Bridgetown port. Now $140 million to be given in a contract on berth 6. Coverley, which is over 1,100 acres, at which they own 1,100 houses, sorry, at which the government is only receiving less than $2.50, Wilfred, per square foot on each on the land there. 2,300 lots at Bushy Park that have been committed to in an MOU, but mercifully the contract has not been signed because when the National Housing committed to give them the 2,300 lots, they did not even own the land at the time. So that's the only thing that saved us there at Bushy Park. Ultimately, the Hyatt Hotel, the land on the port where the cement has gone and for which there's a town planning dispute, the Bushy Park Racing Circuit itself, the adopter sign businesses on the highway, and I can go on and on. One person cannot get more than $1 billion worth of contracts at the very time that Barbados has a smaller economy at the end of the decade than it started at the beginning of the decade. And I have no dislike, and I'm glad all of you all are here. I have no dislike for anybody that carries my initials. None. Mark my word on that. I have said publicly, and I mean it, that they are a Barbadian company, and I actually admire aspects of their drive. And I would like us to have that kind of drive regionally and internationally. But on 166 square miles, Ricky, you cannot get all. It's as simple as that. And Tony asked me, what drives me? Fairness. So if you know fairness drives me, you understand why I have this particular response and reaction all the time. If I see the gentleman now, I'll hug him. I don't hate nobody. I don't have no malice in my heart for nobody, because malice gives you cancer. And I ain't dying from cancer. I even stopped smoking. You understand? I did. 47 weeks and counting. But the point is that ordinary people in this country deserve a chance. We have a real problem systemically, and you raised it, Ricky, where banks are not giving people the rate of return on savings accounts that they used to get. Ryan and Clyde Masker will probably tell you that that might have been the cost that the banks paid for allowing the central bank to reach inside of them and pull out the money in order to be able to hold the government paper that it has been holding for the last 3 years. But it is a major problem because it means, and this is what I addressed in here to you last year, when I talked about the need for new financial instruments, because we have to create a win-win situation where people can get an adequate return on their savings while at the same time allowing people who want to invest in new activity can be able to access capital that is not crazy in terms of the cost of capital. Similarly, we have to be able to do it in terms of creating instruments for mezzanine financing as well as greater equity capital. But what we cannot have is the choking off of opportunities in Barbados for ordinary people. And we believe that especially those who will be on the front line of the adjustment, I said to you last year, that government needs to have a policy of affirmative action that ensures that those who bear the brunt of adjustment to help us stabilize Barbados must be on the front line of contracts and the supply of goods and services in this country, because we must all be able to sleep well at night. And if there is a category of Barbadian that is not earning, then believe you me, we are all at risk in this country. Barbados is too small for us not to use Peter Ram's mantra on every occasion. All are we in this together. Believe you me.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your questions today.
My only comment,
I'm going to give...
my only comment is this, that come whatever may, today is the last day that I will address you in November as leader of the opposition, regardless of what happens in the future. Regardless of what happens in the future. And it is because, and I say this now, and I ask all of the members of the Barbados Labour Party to stand with me, because I want you to understand that this has been, of the candidates who are here, this has been an arduous and long journey carried on by people who have displayed tremendous courage. And I am proud to call them my colleagues. I really am. Please, sir. We have had in Barbados to carry a flag for a country that knows that it is declining. But few people are prepared to stand and to have the courage of conviction to speak. And I trust and pray that the one opportunity to get it right, which the election affords us, that we do so. Because this country has been good to each and every one of us. It is now time for us to be good to it and to give our children and our children's children the chances that we had that are significantly greater than what Ms. Boyce and her generation had to face coming out of the 30s and 40s in Barbados. So I thank the Chamber of Commerce. I've been here in 2010, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, all as leader of the opposition. Whatever happens, I will not be here as leader of the opposition again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mottley. Just to echo your words, we can and we shall. And with that, I'm going to invite Mr. Carlos Wharton, who is the Executive Director of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce, to move the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be extremely brief. First of all, I would like to thank the Honorable Mia Amor Mottley for having a conversation with members of the Chamber and the wider business community that was insightful, if I could remember correctly. Insightful, frank, compelling, and full of hope. Thank you very much for your support to the Chamber. And no matter what happens in 2018, we look forward to your continued support. Thank you very much. You're good. I would also like to thank Mr. Paul Ashby for agreeing in very short notice to being our moderator. Paul, I think we found a formula that can work in the future, and I hope you would consider working with us again in future events. Obviously, I would like to thank our Senior Vice President for Finance, Ms. Betty Braffett, for agreeing to fill in for our President, who unavoidably couldn't make it today. He has an illness and had to undergo some treatment. I would like to thank the Hilton Barbados and their staff for making sure that we work with the leader of the opposition in such fine environments. I would like to thank the staff of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry for their hard work. Without them, this definitely could not be possible, and I would like it for you to give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. I would like to thank the media for covering the event, as well as all of the sound technicians and all the people behind the scenes making it happen. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for supporting this event, and I would like to wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.